Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I appreciate you guys attending. My name is Phillip Long, and I'm going to be the introducer and the guest today, which is a little bit different for me. But I want to talk about something I think is extremely relative within the marketplace today, and that's how to keep employees engaged so that they're actually productive. And we're seeing, I think, a very staggering amount of things happening today that we're going to, as it relates to the employer-employee relationship game. And we're going to talk about some of that and how are some measures that we can do as employers or managers in order to mitigate that. Just as a housekeeping thing, I'm going to try to keep this very close to 1 hour, respect your time. If there's any questions, if you would, please put them in the chat and I'd be happy to answer them. I may try to answer them throughout the presentation, or I may wait until the very end, which is oftentimes a lot easier for me, especially because I am kind of handling both sides. Christy, my marketing director, was actually having surgery today. So let me tell you a little bit about who I am. I am ultimately a technologist and an entrepreneur, and I am really fascinated, as you'll discover here in a minute. I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm fascinated by how things work and how business works. And I've been in the IT industry for over 20 years, and we have literally hundreds of clients all the way from Gulf Breeze to Gulfport, Mississippi. I currently own 5 different businesses, some of which are within the IT space, but also some in real estate and some other ventures that I'm doing. So at the end of the day, I think I can really relate to the average business guy and, trying to, wear all those hats that we have to wear in order to be successful. A lot of you don't know that I own a company called Veritas Consulting, and that is really a business coaching, team building company that I formed years ago, and I've not really pushed that entity, but this is going to kind of fall under that heading, what we're going to talk about today. So today I want to talk about how to uncover the how behind employees' why and maximize their strengths. We're going to define and identify what motivates your staff. We're going to figure out how to hire the right person for the job at your company. And then we're going to make technology easy for your team to avoid frustrations. That's what we're going to talk about today, is trying to really dig out the how is what we'll start with. And behavior is ultimately a how, and it is how you're going to operate as a person. And ultimately, it's the universal language that makes you do what you do. This is how you operate. And there's really no good or bad or right or wrong style about what we're talking about here. And we want to set a couple of objectives as we relate to helping determine the how people operate. Well, first, we're going to identify your style. We're going to identify and understand and appreciate people who have a different style, and ultimately develop a process to communicate with different styles. That's the objectives that we want to meet here. And I think to have a really cohesive team and a productive team, we as business owners are going to have to have to invest a little bit of energy in this. I was reading a recent report, and it was saying that 41% of workers globally are thinking about quitting. More than 50% of 18 to 25-year-olds are considering quitting, and more than 70% of workers want a more flexible, more remote workforce to continue to work. So, a lot of this has come out of because of the COVID, because of the pandemic, the current kind of the political landscape. It's put people really in I think, a disheartened state. So if we can understand our employees better, we're going to be able to manage them better, and ultimately put them in situations where they can win. And I think as business leaders, we have to develop these win-win relationships. Right now, I almost feel like the scales have tilted slightly towards the worker right now, and either whenever either party, the worker or the employer, when they get the upper hand, it's really not best for the overall system. So we have to keep in mind that we want to develop win-win relationships that are going to be able to sustain the test of time. So talking back on really what behaviors are, it's really not a representation of intelligence, motivation, skills, experience, education, training. It's none of those things. It is really more about just simply how a person is going to behave, and also under what types of circumstances they might behave. So we want to talk about a little bit about this language that we're talking about. And I didn't really go over it initially. It's what we use is the DISC profile. That's what we're going to talk about today. And it's DISC. And the D stands for dominance. And that's how you address problems and challenges. And ultimately, the I is influence, and that's how we're going to handle situations involving people and contacts within within people. And then next, we're going to talk about the steadiness, how you demonstrate pace and consistency. And finally, we're going to talk about compliance, and that's how you react to procedures and constraints. And again, every one of these is not necessarily good or bad. There's no perfect DISC profile per se, but there are some things that go with it that we need to understand about ourselves first, and then even within our team, in order for us to be more effective in maintaining a productive workforce. So let's talk about the D. And the D, of course, stands for dominance. And whenever you take these assessments, it comes out with basically a score in all of these areas. But a person with a low dominance, I personally have a dominance of about 95, and it is extremely high. And that it has its benefits in that I love confrontation. I'm quick to anger, active. Those things are sometimes bad, but like the Bible says, be angry but do not sin. Ultimately, there's a lot of fuel that can come out of somebody who is dominant, but there's also a lot of damage that they can done if they can't be constrained. One of the things I heard recently is that it would be better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So all of these things, whenever you have especially if you rank very high like I do on dominance, I have to be very aware of that. So I have to be careful. And that energy that I can get off of that high, rate of D can really be used as fuel, but I have to be very careful because I can't injure people along the way, right? And one of the biggest fears that somebody with a high D has is being taken advantage of. They don't want to be taken advantage of. And somebody with a low D, on the other hand, is going to be very mild. They're going to be slow to anger. They're going to dislike confrontation altogether. A lot of times they'll use humor and to offset tough situations, whereas the person with a high D is going to be quick to anger and often very active. This is some ways, and again, I'm sure every one of us has a person on the team that immediately comes to mind that has a high D, and they're the one that can really get ticked off quick. And here's some ways that we can view this person. They're looking at it from a value to the team perspective. Is they're a bottom line organizer? Again, you hand them a piece of paper with numbers on it, they're going to look straight to the bottom and look at the return on investment a lot of times. A lot of times they're going to be forward looking. They're going to look for challenges, and they're going to, be always kind of oriented towards conquering that next hill. A lot of times they're going to initiate activity within the group, and many times they're going to be very innovative. They're going to be the kind of person that is going to um, want to figure out a better way, always move faster, always get better. And if you're going to have a person like that, you have to have them in an environment that gives them freedom from control, supervision, and details as much as you can. You're going to have to really define their box, and they're going to be wanting an innovative and a futuristic oriented environment. They're going to want to have something that it's not stagnant. They're going to want to, again, conquer that next hill, figure out the new way to do it. They're going to want to some way express their ideas and viewpoints. And oftentimes, what you'll find with people that have a high D is a lot of times they're not necessarily wanting to jump on that next hill. They're wanting maybe to vent or to express an idea, bounce ideas. But because they're so dominant in the way that they act, a lot of times people hear that as, oh no, we're fixing to go on another ride. And it puts people, at risk, or they feel like, oh no, I'm not ready for that. That change factors really can upset people. And as we kind of start to look at this across the board, looking at the complete profiles of people, we're going to have a more of a view of what I'm talking about there. They don't like routine work, and they want challenge, and they want opportunity within their work. Now, under stress, they're going to be demanding, possibly argumentative, opinionated, aggressive, and possibly even egotistical, or at least that could be the way that they're viewed for sure. There's some limitations. They may overuse their position. They could set standards way too high for other people. A lot of times people with high Ds are achievers. And with them not understanding themselves, they may think everyone is a big time achiever, and they start setting goals, and they're like, man, this makes me so happy. I'm driving at this. And you look around, and you're 8 hills ahead of everybody else. And that's not a leader, that's a pioneer. And you really don't want to be a pioneer in today's workforce. You want to keep your team very close to you as you take them through the desert, as it is, I would say, right now. A lot of times they lack tact and diplomacy. They're going to get straight to the point, and they'll take on too much too soon. And the emotion that is actually being measured here is anger. They are their anger is, and again, we think of that as really being a negative emotion because we think of people that aren't able to control that. But I'll go back to it would be better to be a warrior under constraint in a garden, because you could be a great gardener as a warrior, but you're not going to be a great warrior as a gardener. So you want to be sometimes a little over prepared, if you will. Let's look at the I factor. That stands for influence. And a lot of times you'll see people in sales or people that are very social that have a high I. They're the kind of person that before you get down to business, they're going to have to tell you about their weekend. They're going to have to tell you about a trip that they're planning, or they're going to have some story about the football game or something. And they are really ultimately trying to influence you to see it their way. They're very optimistic. This again is at the high side of things, and they're outgoing, and they're very action oriented. And they have a very high level of trust, which could be a bad thing. They think, oh yeah, great, I just met my new best friend, and they're maybe not your best friend. You just met them. You may want to vet them a little bit longer. One of the things, if you have a low I, you're going to be more pessimistic, possibly more skeptical, more logical, and more passive. And as it relates to what you're fearing, it's really loss of social recognition. You want to be noticed within the crowd if you have a high I. Now, let's talk about what a person that has a high I And I'll kind of allude to, like we just went over the high D. A high D and a high I oftentimes is a good sales person profile. They're dominant, they're out after something. They're going to be, trying to conquer the next hill, and they're very influential, meaning they want to be recognized by people. So they're going to be out meeting people and shaking hands, kissing babies, and all that kind of stuff. And they're going to be dominant in making sure that all those things happen. The value to a team, someone with a high I, is they're going to be optimistic and enthusiastic. They're going to have very creative ways to solve problem, oftentimes by drawing the team together. And they're going to negotiate conflict very well. They're going to be the peacemaker a lot of times within the group. They're not going to, a lot of times they don't take themselves too seriously. In one regard, they use humor a lot and things like that, in order to kind of pacify, all of the different opinions on the team. For this person to be happy, they're going to have a high degree of personal contacts, and they're going to need a good degree of freedom from control and detail. Oftentimes, we're going to get there in a minute with steadiness and compliance. Oftentimes, people with high I's have low steadiness and low compliance. Again, you think of the best sales guy, they're a DI. They're dominant and they're influential, but they don't fill out the paperwork. They don't do everything like they're supposed to according to the compliance rules. They're breaking the rules, and that's just the way it is. So you have to build a team around them to keep them, productive in the environment. They also, they're looking for ideas where they can be heard, and they want a democratic supervisor with whom they can associate. They kind of want to be the boss's friend. They don't necessarily want to have maybe don't have to all the way be a friend, but they definitely want to feel like they have a social relationship with their boss. And whenever they get under stress, they're oftentimes self-promoting, and they can be overly optimistic, talkative, gabby, and then even under extreme stress, they can be unrealistic with what they think that they can actually do. Oftentimes, the limitations. They're inattentive to details. They'll be unrealistic in appraising people. They have that high trust that comes out, and they're thinking absolutely best case scenario and not considering anything short of that. And a lot of times they're situational listeners, where they are not necessarily, they're listening for what they want to hear a lot of times, not what they need to hear, if you will. And that emotion is optimism. They are very optimistic. Now we're going to get to S. The S factor is for steadiness. And with that, we're looking at a person who is extremely steady is going to be very passive. And they are not emotional, maybe even what you would call it. I don't think it's correct term for stoic, but a lot of times people think of, keep a stiff upper lip. They're going to be a person that's not emotional. They're also going to be very slow to change. They're going to like a slow pace. So if we're running an organization and you're thinking about coming out with a bunch of changes, you really got to be careful with these guys, because they do not like change. Their biggest fear is losing security, lack of control. They do not want to change, and they are, they want to know what they're doing tomorrow. They want very much a consistent environment. And if you have a low S, that's a high S. And if you have a low S, you're able to quick to change, fast paced, even to the point of where you want to change. And it can, it's not just a matter of liking it, where you'll create change just for the sake of change that doesn't do anything. And the value to the team of somebody with a high S is they're dependable. They work for a leader and a cause. If you can create your cause, they'll sit there and they will march at a given pace, very long, and they'll be very patient and empathetic. for the overall mission. They are logical in the way that they think, and they're very service oriented. So there's a lot of benefits that can come with this person, but you really need to outline their role, and their role needs to stay pretty consistent. And whenever their roles change, you need to tell them months ahead it's going to change, and then weeks ahead, and then it's going to change next week, and then it's going to change tomorrow. And how are you doing with the change? That kind of thing. Be very respectful of their lack of change. Their ideal environment is somewhere where it's stable and predictable. And again, I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such a challenge in the workforce right now, is because the majority of people are steady. Like a high D is not that common. Like 10-12% of society has a high D, and then about 20% has a high D. And there's different combinations that I'm not going to get into completely here because it's just too much material. But a lot of people are steady. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're seeing right now is there's a lot of unknowns in the marketplace, and it's scaring people. So ultimately, they want long-term work relationships, which is great. We want that. They want little conflict. They're not going to tolerate chaos and a lot of drama. And they ultimately don't want a bunch of restrictive rules. They just want to get in there and do their job. And if they get stressed out, they'll seem, unconcerned, not engaged is a word you'll hear a lot of times. They'll be hesitant, and oftentimes they'll even be inflexible, meaning that they're not going to change. This is the way we've always done it, and things like that. There's some limitations they have. They'll often, acquiesce. They'll yield to avoid controversy. They have a difficulty in establishing priorities. Again, that's why they want a slow, steady, don't change environment. If you put them with 1,000 things coming at them and they got to juggle them, and while they're juggling, they have to prioritize them, they're gonna really fail, because they'll be minoring they'll be majoring on the minors a lot of times. And you got to be real careful, because they don't like unwarranted change, and they don't like diverse situations. And this emotion is really non-emotion. They they don't want to emote. They don't want to exert. They want things to be the same, and they want it to be steady. I will jump over here to the C factor, which is compliance. And with compliance, we find that somebody with a high level of compliance is going to follow the rules. They're going to look for things that have very low risk. They're going to be very passive, and they're going to be very precise about their use of time. A great CEO would be somebody with a very high D, and then somebody that is very compliant, and that they love structure, they love process, and they love proper use of time, because that's what's going to really maximize their rate of return. And they don't necessarily have to be extremely influential. Although a little I would certainly help a CEO, but they're probably going to need to have somewhat of a low S, because oftentimes things change, and they're going to have to be able to switch gears, like all of us business owners know about wearing multiple hats. And ultimately, they don't want to make mistakes. That's what they're afraid of. And somebody with a low C is going to be somebody that'll roll the dice. They'll take big risk. Oftentimes they'll break the rules. They don't see the rules as being very, they're not, there's something to be, basically a guide or a gauge, but they're not necessarily be followed. And they're ultimately seeking independence. If we've got somebody with a high C, they bring some value to the team in that they maintain high standards. They don't have to be told. They'd be great for quality assurance kind of things. They're going, once they understand what the compliance is or what the standard is, they're going to meet that. They're also very conscientious and steady. They define They clarify and they want information and they want to be tested. They want to understand what reality is, and they want to follow that. And they are oftentimes a very comprehensive problem solver. If you look at an engineer, and I've been in the IT industry forever, all my engineers are high, steady, high C, SCs, and they are. That is the nature. They don't like change. They like things to be the same. And if you go in there changing things, it's going to be really difficult on them. Uh, the high C people are really good where critical thinking is needed. They work well in the technical workspace, just like engineering, like I said, or specialized areas. They want a close relationship with a very small group. They're not really wanting to go out and have 1,000 friends. They'd much rather have 5 good friends. And they like a familiar work environment. Oftentimes, if you put them in their private office or their own work area, they're going to perform better. So a lot of times, the old cubicles and all that kind of stuff that everybody went to, probably 6, 8, 10 years ago. A lot of times, people with high Cs, they want their own space. Uh, Under stress, they're going to see pessimistic, picky, and fussy, and maybe even overly critical of things. They're going to be able to point out the things that don't meet their high standards. And limitations is you have to be careful with how you criticize them because they can become extremely defensive and they can oftentimes get bogged down in the details. You put a DI with an SC, you're going to have some problems. Somebody that's dominant and influential and somebody who's steady and compliant, they're absolute polar opposites. And, the high I guy thinks everybody's their friend and they can say whatever they want to say. And they're going to say that to this high C guy, and he's going to get his feelings hurt. He's going to become defensive, and there's going to be an intense situation that's going to follow. And again, the emotion here is really fear. They don't want things to be less than their standards. One other concept that I want to get out here, there's actually a couple more, but this first one I think is really important is the adapted style and the natural style. The natural style is what would say the real you. It's unconscious behaviors. It's really who you are. And the adapted should be fight or flight. It's really a response to an environment. A lot of times it is related to whenever you give this assessment, you'll see that the natural style and the adapted style is you want them to be pretty close because if not, they're really in a stressful situation. And like for instance, I had this told to me a long time ago, like it's almost like you were holding up a heavy object. If you were like a real low I, like you didn't like a lot of personal interface, and yet you were the face of the company and you had a big party that you were putting on for the company and you had to greet all of these people, you would be under a great deal of stress keeping all of that together. And if you live under that great deal of stress, it's going to wear on you if you're not in the right seat on the bus. So it's really important to get this. And it's really important for your natural and your adapted to be look a lot the same. And if there's a big swing in one of them, there's something that is going to be putting that person under stress, and that employee is going to burn out, and you're going to get those negative attributes that we talked about under each of the individual profiles here. What I normally see is like on somebody in their natural state, this little graph here represents it. The adapted state on the compliance goes up a little bit because they're in a work environment, and then their dominance often falls. This one's pretty steady, and actually in the adapted style it went up. But a lot of times what you'll see is that their dominance went down a little bit because they're subjected, they're basically allowing themselves to be subject to you, and then their compliance goes up because they're trying to follow the rules. So that's an important component. And whenever you do one of these tests and you see that, you want to see them pretty much the same. If they move a whole lot, you're gonna have problems with that person. Then the next thing here is what we talk about, the energy line. And the energy line is talking about, really should be at 50%. This is, my graph's a little bit off, but it's, the energy line is actually at 50%. All right. And the primary style is the furthest from the energy line, and that could be up or down. And in this circumstance, starting at 50, we've got this 78. So this person's primary is, that's, let's say that's 28, and this is dominance would be 17. So yeah, this is going to be their dominant primary, excuse me, this is going to be their primary behavior. They're going to like compliance first. One thing to note is that over 30% of primary styles are on the lower side, are beneath the energy line. And that would be represented like this. Let's just say this person had a 10 on the dominance. That means they're going to be very, very, very passive. And that's going to be their dominant or their primary style. They're going to be a very laid back individual. Or in my case, my dominance is way up here. So that's going to be well above the power line. And so I am going, or the energy line. So that is going to be my first, that's what you're going to know about me first if you're paying attention, or that's what I need to know about myself if I'm paying attention. And I need to think about all of the bad attributes that come from someone with a high D, and I need to have those top of mind presence whenever I'm dealing with people, especially people that are subject to me, or like my employees. And I think that's very important for us as leaders to understand who we are, and the how we are going to behave. And if we can start to identify that, and again, these things can be used within, not only to know yourself, but now share this with the team, and now the team understands how other people are. And a lot of times just understanding, oh yeah, that guy has a high D, or that person has a low C, that means that they're not going to be very compliant. I'm going to need to recognize that. They're going to need to know that if they're having to fill out forms and do paperwork, maybe this isn't the role for them. Maybe they need a different seat on the bus. And it really helps a lot with the hiring process too, because you can basically identify what type of role that you're looking for. So there's ways that you can look at the primary style and the secondary style, and those are the type things that are really going to be the biggest drivers. Like for me, I'm very high D, very high I, so I'm going to be outgoing, overly optimistic, and I'm going to be kind of a driven type person. And then if we look at the spread, you can actually kind of go over all of that, and it's represented nicely here on this wheel descriptor. And like for me, I'm a high D and a high I. I'm going to be over here and be viewed as a conductor, somebody who's going to make things move. Now, as you move over here, you're really kind of getting in a high D, high I. You're getting into somebody who's more of a salesperson, a supporting role. And as we move on around, maybe your HR people need to be a supporter or relator, and then your coordinators, and then you have your analysts. So, and again, there's no profile that is better than anyone else, but I was talking about the DC, somebody high DC, they're an implementer, like a CEO, they're going to make things happen. As far as, and be able to keep a process in place, because they're analyzing and they're doing all that kind of stuff. So it's really important to fit the role of the responsibilities for the person off of really how they behave. It's going to make things so much easier. I'm not going to go into this, but these things here, like these reports come out with checklists for communicating and ideal environments, and so that you can kind of see how we can make our people feel more at home, how we can make them feel that we're listening. And then also it's cool with team building. I mean, you can take a test, answer some questions, and in 15 minutes, you can have an astounding level of understanding about yourself and about someone else. And you can use that to build those teams with reporting. And then understanding the other parts of us is what's another piece of this is like the driving forces. And this is a more integrated part of the whole person. And that really answers the question of why. Why do I do what I do? Now, this one is a lot of times more difficult to recognize in yourself and others. We don't really think this way. I don't believe, but it has a big influence on our decision making as to what we're going to do, because it's based upon our value of things, and it's almost like the lens at which we see the world. And as I go through it, I'll give you some examples to talk about it. And it has to be described in behavioral terms. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. There's ultimately there is four top drivers that we're going to talk about, and they call these the primary driving force clusters. And then the other ones are going to be situational, that meaning that under certain circumstances, these may actually weigh out on something. And for instance, some of them could be, like your altruistic, or how you're really wanting to, the way that you want to help other people. And you may not really be into that much, but for children, you are. So under a certain circumstance, you may be motivated, to help children. And then there's some indifferent ones that oftentimes can cause problems, especially if you're dealing with someone who is very much different from you. Because if you're a highly resourceful person, um, you're going to be wanting everything to, have a return on investment. You see somebody who is wasting money or wasting time or wasting resources in some way, that could actually offend you. And vice versa, the person who is like, kind of, not that that doesn't matter, they may think that you're way too whatever. So you got to understand those kind of things about how people form their why. And this can be used very much not only for yourself, but also for the people on the team, because you may give someone a gift or a bonus or something, and it really not be their thing. And you could spend a lot of money and not get much reward for the actual employee. So these are things that you can use this type of information in order to more effectively, promote within the team. So again, there's how we see the world, how we compare to others, and we're going to talk about some text describing the actual driving forces that I think is going to really bring this into focus. And ultimately, we want to identify our drivers, and we want to understand them and also appreciate others that have different types of drivers. And then we want to think about, how do we communicate with people who are different than us? And I'll just be completely transparent. There was a time whenever I looked at things like this as almost manipulative, but it's only manipulative if you're using it for the gain of yourself or your company. But if you really have the other person's best interest and you're trying to put together a win-win situation, it is true leadership. And I think once your team recognizes that you're that kind of person and that you would invest in them, they really begin to trust, and you can get somewhere with this kind of stuff. Let's talk a little bit about some of the some of the drivers here. One of them is called theoretical, and remember we talked about we're going to find them in terms. And on each side of the theoretical, which is basically knowledge in essence, we have two different ends of the spectrum. One is instinctive that we're going to talk about now, and then the other is intellectual. We're going to go over each one of these. So people who are instinctive, what they really are doing is they are utilizing their knowledge based off of past experiences. And they're really only seeking knowledge or new knowledge whenever they're going to be able to apply it quickly. A lot of times they're just going to Google the topic whenever it comes up and figure out how they're going to take that information and apply it. And they're very comfortable in situations when they can rely on those past experiences and draw them up. And a lot of times they're often able to start a project knowing that they're going to be able to gather the needed information along the way. And so that's more of their why. They use knowledge as a means by which to get something done, and they're not going to gather knowledge just to gather knowledge. Whereas a person who is intellectual, and I'll tell a quick story on an intellectual person, and we're in the IT industry, and a lot of times, really the goal is to solve the problem, right? And of course, we don't want it recurring and all those kind of things. But this was years ago, and I had a guy who was actually published in Linux magazine, and I always told him, I said, "Look, dude, I only want to know what time it is. Don't tell me how a Swiss watch works, because every project I put him on, he would gain knowledge, 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 and really he just wanted the opportunity to learn, and he wanted to ultimately discover how that product worked. And that is the way a lot of people are, and they're going to continue researching until all information is discovered. And they have trouble starting projects without having all the information at hand. And they'll focus on gathering the information rather than relying on any type of intuition. Really important to know. And again, if we're just talking about just get her done kind of guy, the instinctive knowledge type is going to be able to outperform the intellectual in most cases. Now, again, we've got to have those intellectuals who are just out just gathering data because they may stumble upon something, but the 80-20 rule says that you're probably going to figure it out on the way 80% of the time, and about the other, a smaller margin is going to be able to where you're going to need that deep dive. The other one is more of the utilitarian, and it's really just utility. And the two ends of the spectrum is somebody who is extremely selfless, and they're looking for the greater good. They're not looking for a personal return on investment. Whereas the other person that we'll talk about second is going to be trying to maximize that efficiency on returns. And again, there can be some problems between the two of these guys, especially as it relates to resources. But a selfless person is really just wanting to help others. They're not looking to help themselves, and they will accomplish tasks for the sake of just the accomplishment. This is the kind of person that you could give them a flex day to go work over at Protestant Pantry or something and go give food out, and they would be stoked. That would be better than giving them money. And they're going to focus on that greater good versus their personal return on investment. And they really value people. And that's what they're looking, not so much what that person can provide, but just the overall servicing of people. Then we're looking at the resourceful person is going to be looking for how are they getting a return on investment for their everything, their time, their talent, their energy, their money, their resources, everything. They don't want to waste a stroke. They're the person that he's the ultimate steward of all things, and they're driven to maximize opportunities in order to create financial flexibility. They're energized by building that framework that maximizes their talent, their investment, and they're often very sensitive to wasting time, resources, or opportunities. You don't want to go to this person and just have long conversations in their office because you're going to make them mad. You got to keep it moving, keep it on topic. Then if we look at the other is more of the objective person. They're looking at the objects, the aesthetics of things. They want to see um, things, their surroundings. What does it look like? And they have the objective and the harmonious. And whenever you look at somebody who's extremely objective, they're looking for things really based off the functionality of their surroundings. And this is real important when you're doing office decor or the office, um, just the overall work. Some guys are like, look, I want a square table made out of plywood and some 2x4 legs. And the other person, and they're like, yeah, that's the best way because all this thing is a desk. And the other person's like, no, I want the marble top. I want it to look a certain way. And this is often one of those that is situational on people where in certain things they're very objective, in other ways they're very harmonious. But they want to, people who are objective are viewing things in pieces, not as the whole, and they'll focus on functionality over harmony. There are also people who are able to compartmentalize chaotic situations and focus on desired outcomes. They can have a dumpster fire burning in the corner and they're going to focus on the thing that's on their desk. And they can actually sometimes thrive in an environment where things are not very standard, where they're very chaotic. Then if we look on the other side of this, we're looking at somebody who is really enjoying things just for the beauty of it. My mom used to always tell me, son, you need to stop and smell the roses. And that's kind of the way this person is they are looking at things more from an experiential perspective. And they're looking to have a balance in things around them, and they're wanting to kind of create that balance. Be like an interior decorator, somebody who has a high level of connecting the humanity to the surroundings, and even not only with physical but also even in relationships. They want to have a harmonious relationship with people and have that rewarding interaction with people, and they're going to be happy whenever they're able to create that, not only physically but also from a personnel standpoint. So those people are really important to have. And then finally, we're looking at the social, how you view others. Some people are very intentional, and they're they're going to assist people basically for a very specific person, not just for the sake of helping. And they are more really kind of thinking about what it is I'm going to get out of this circumstance or this situation. And we're looking at, they see the world as a tool set to accomplish their goals. And they see the importance of keeping emotions out of business decision. Business is business. And a lot of times, it could almost, could be viewed as selfishness at its extreme. But again, this is the thing that makes them happy. They see that they're being very intentional with what they're doing, and they're kind of suppressing that the altruistic side of things, and they're looking for more of a return on things. And oftentimes that will go along with that utilitarian profile, somebody that is very much wanting to use resources appropriately in their mind for return on investment. Oftentimes they're very intentional in their social surroundings. Then we have the altruistic. That's people who just want to have to benefit others. And that's, again, is on the extreme. And a lot of times you'll see people that this is a situational kind of a thing, how they view others. Some people they're really close to, and others they have more of a transactional relationship with. But this person who is extremely altruistic, they are wanting to give generously of their time, talent with no expectation of return. And they often respond to people in need. Again, this is the kind of person that if there's a Habitat for Humanity house being built, if you gave them a day off to go work there, they would be on top of the world. That would be something that meant a lot to them. Or go work down with the animals, the stray dogs. They're liable to have, oh yeah, we don't buy those high end dogs. We only get shelter dogs or whatever. These are people that get a great deal of satisfaction out of helping things that are not being helped. Then we'll look here at this this collaborative piece here where we're talking about power. And there's the collaborative people who are driven by being in that supporting role, and then the commanding person. First, with the collaborative, these are people who feel comfortable supporting. They don't need the recognition. They want to focus on that greater good, and they want to ultimately be behind the scenes a lot of times. A lot of times this could be a great person who is your assistant, who is taking care of you, and they're setting aside their own agenda to make you look great. Then we have that commanding person, and that person is somebody who really is looking for power. Ultimately, they're driven. They have a very a focused goal, and they see to get there, they're going to take control of the situation in order to put themselves in a particular position, particularly destination at some point. These are the guys that are setting the 5-year goals and hitting them. They're commanding. And when they feel strongly about a situation, they're going to often say the ends justify the means. And at extreme, it could actually there could be some fatalities, human fatalities along the way, because the goal is more important than the people sometimes. Again, I said extreme, so you want to be thoughtful of that. But these guys work hard and long. They'll absolutely make it happen. And they're passionate about creating something that leads to an enduring legacy. They're thinking about, how am I going to be viewed in 50 years, 20 years? How's my grandkids? What are they going to think of me? Then we'll talk about really the overall methodologies, how we get there. And some people are more receptive in the way that they do things. They're open to new ideas, methods, and all that. And they're always looking for new ways to accomplish routine tasks. And ultimately, they're creative when interpreting systems and will adopt aspects that they see as a benefit. And then when we look at somebody who is structured, we're going to find that they are more traditional. They are not wanting to, rediscover the wheel or go outside the lines. They're wanting to follow a proven method for living. And they may follow very much, it could be something that their parents, the way their parents were. And if it's good enough for my mom or my dad, it's good enough for me. A lot of times, religious systems, they'll follow closely that, they have seen success come out before, and they're convinced that that is the way to go. They place a very high value on following and implementing these particular type systems, and they'll work very hard to stay within that framework and move ahead. Again, this can be really a great type employee for you, because they have a basically a model, whereas in today's world we see people are all over the place. And again, not one's better than the other or anything else, but I think understanding and knowing what you're dealing with is something that is extremely important. So that's really the presentation. And I want to kind of end it with, with how do you apply this type of information within your workforce and within your team in order to, bring people together, build those win-win situations. because what we're seeing is the whole world is, seemingly falling apart. And, I told you some of those stats that, um, I almost think that, and again, if I think the employees are kind of getting the upper hand right now, people are struggling to keep employees and also to have a good culture. And I think as business owners, we've got to not manipulate, but lead. We need to unlock who we are, understand our strengths, and then also the things that could be abrasive to our staff, to our spouses, to everybody. That self-discovery kind of thing is very important. And then we need to um, go there with to help build teams, help build teams that are more tolerant, more understanding of others, and also help get the people in the right seat on the bus so that you're not absolutely 100%, keeping somebody stressed out. Are there any questions? I'll open it up for questions here. That's a lot of information that we just went over. I probably should have put these two into two different things with the how and the why. Let's see if there's any questions. Okay. Question is, how could these be used in the hiring process? Well, I think it's really important to define the role of folks and make sure that the responsibilities are there. I tell you, this same company that does this stuff has a tool basically that you can give, say, your superstar player within a certain part of your team that does a role exceptionally well, and then you can have your candidates review or take the same assessment, and then you can have the report show you how the gap analysis, if you will, between your superstar and the potential employee, because we all know how expensive hiring is in general. Not only just getting the candidate in, just the cost of the ads, but then all the training and all the energy, and then you got to train them to do the role and all those kind of things. So that's one way that this type of information could be used in the hiring process. All right. For the sake of time, I really do want to respect y'all's time. I think I want to go ahead, and I have an offer for everyone on the call where we will do a free DISC assessment, like that first profile of understanding really how you behave with the dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. For the decision makers on the call, I'll do a free DISC assessment. All you have to do is send an email to my email address, and I will send you a link, and you can take again about 15, 20 minutes and just simply ask some questions. And then I'll do an analysis for you. And I really encourage people to take me up on that, because it is something that I think that, especially with the report, it really has an incredible amount of analysis on there. And it even has some areas where you may want to look to improve. And I think that if we improve as individuals, the good news is all the ships will rise with the tide. And you're not only going to improve for your employees' sake, but you're also going to improve for your spouse's sake or your kid's sake, or you're going to improve in all areas of your life whenever you improve in one area. And then you may even want to think about doing some of these team building things to get to know your employees better and understand how to communicate with them so that you can have more of that transparent conversation with them. And you can even kind of poke fun at yourself and others whenever you have a framework to discuss behaviors and motivations. And then again, the motivations part of it is you can also figure out how to motivate, because you could give somebody a pile of money and they won't be happy. You could listen to somebody or let them go work at the dog pound for a day, or send them out for dinner at a nice restaurant or a particular show. And that money will make them very happy because the why of you is actually what brings about satisfaction. So, all right. So if you guys are interested in taking me up on that free disc assessment, all you have to do is simply email me at plong@askbis.com. And I'd be happy to do that. And I appreciate so much the opportunity to have everyone here. And in the event that I can help, please reach out and let me know. Have a great afternoon.